Hi there, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Sunday Scaries podcast. Um, where stress does not discriminate. Stress is something that affects all of us at all ages, and the science is out. It is one of the top killers in the United States, leading to a variety of different mental and physical issues. So, we're all trying to learn how to deal with stress, and this podcast is specifically dedicated to um, stress with men, because sometimes as men we see that being stressful as shameful, as maybe part of being weak, and we don't process it correctly, and it's killing us. The numbers are out there. The suicide rate numbers are out there. The heart disease rates are out there, which are correlated to stress and cholesterol and whatnot. So today I have a very special guest here, a third year med student, Krishna Patel, who has some experience and some insight on how to deal with stress specifically adolescents. So Krishna, how would you kind of introduce yourself to the public here?
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me, Giancarlo. Really happy to be here.
Mhm.
So, as you mentioned, I'm Krishna. I'm a third year medical student at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai right now. And I'm a born and raised Pittsburgher before that who is looking to find ways to help bring together school districts and healthcare providers, specifically with a focus on improving mental health access in schools.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll talk about your project a little bit later. What would you say is the state of mental health in adolescence, and why are these resources so important for our teenagers to be able to kind of process these emotions and stress specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I feel like mental health is just so central to any aspect of day to day functioning, whether that be just how much harder it is to get any work done when you're under so much stress, how much tougher it makes day after day, not to mention all of the numerous amounts of data and studies you'll see over the news that show both short and long term impacts of stress, whether that be in terms of being able to find employment or long term effects on the heart, the brain, everything really. I think it's really it's really an opportunity to, especially with the pandemic, explore more about what we can do collectively as a society to encourage conversations around mental health and make it less of a stigma, which you mentioned at the start is
Hmm.
sometimes a barrier.
Yeah, definitely. And as a third year medical student, you probably have some experience with stress and whatnot, and how to curb it so that you can actually focus and study, right?
You could say so, yeah.
um, how would you say that? Let's focus on adolescence and late teens here. How would you say that males and females uh, differentiate with stress and their mental health? Because we know that since social media started, depression rates in females has skyrocketed and whatnot, but suicide rates in males has also skyrocketed. Um, how would you differentiate how the genders treat stress and their mental health?
It's a really good question because it speaks to the need for a lot of innovative approaches to meet different groups unique needs. So with you mentioned social media, a lot of women they tend to have more externalizing behaviors, which means behaviors where it might be more apparent, whether that be a mood disorder like depression or anxiety. They've in both genders you've seen a huge increase with social media since the pandemic, but I believe women, and not just in the US, but across all countries, tend to have slightly higher rates of depression and anxiety.
Hmm.
With men, what we see more of is a lot of successful suicide attempts or substance abuse disorders or what we call internalizing behaviors, which is maybe issues with anger or types of aggression when there's not an appropriate avenue to be able to have adequate support. And there's a lot of research coming out that's starting to link even mental health to all types of industries in terms of workplace safety and productivity. So I think that's one of the big differences. Another big difference I'd say too is with women. there's tends to be an underdiagnosis of certain certain autism spectrum disorders. They're not identified until later in life.
Mm.
While with men, we also see that men are less likely to seek out psychotherapy or maybe longer term supports than women, and men are less likely to stay in treatment with, like, say, a therapist or a prolonged course as long as women, which can pose its own set of challenges.
You mentioned avenues to get rid of stress and process stress. Just from an anecdotal point of view, it seems like with women, when they get stressed, they're very open about it. They'll tell their friends, they'll tell their significant other, they'll cry it out basically. Whereas, we've all had that guy friend who gets a little stressed, a little angry, and punches a wall or something, and then says, "I'm okay, I'll figure it out another time," and just goes to sleep and suppresses it. Um, what are some ways that men can kind of work through stress and be a little more successful with it rather than keeping it inside and resulting in heart disease, suicide, and other symptoms?
It's a good question. And I feel like, to your point, there's a lot of research that bears out what you're saying, in the sense of, with men, there is like this added pressure of certain stigma trying to put up a certain image. A lot of men, there might be an internalized sense of, if I speak about this, I'll be a bother, or I might
Hmm.
appear weak to others. And I think one of the best ways um, that's a good way to get around this is really having one, even just one role model to look up to, having just one person to talk to, whether that's a parent, a loved one, a friend, a teacher. Even one person can make such a huge difference, and just be that guiding light to be like, you can be yourself around me, you can be honest with me, and this will be a judgment free zone. Because I think at the end of the day, there is a lot of fear at the heart of all of this, and it can be scary to open up and make yourself vulnerable. But if you are in the presence of either someone you look up to, whoever that may be, that can help ease a lot of the pressure.
So, like a mentor, like someone to look up to, maybe.
Exactly, yes.
And you do see that trend kind of in the United States. Not sure what the numbers are on this, but a lot of men maybe growing up without a father figure or a prominent male image that can kind of let them know how to process things correctly and not be overly emotional and kind of go down the wrong path. Don't you feel that way?
I think so. I think and that's like, I was talking to an executive at one of these big sporting goods companies, and what they've recently done is they've rolled out a sports mentorship program, because they've realized that, not just for men but women too, like, sports becomes such a productive way to meet coaches who might serve as mentors,
Hmm.
or just be a healthy, productive way to exercise and channel a lot of potential negative energy into a much more healthy activity. So even as like a very for-profit business, they've realized we have a great opportunity here to do a lot of good, but also further our mission of stimulating interest in sports, and improve just overall happiness in our for our clients. And a large part of that, as you said, yeah, it is serve it. They Some of the projects they funded are setting up mentorship programs with coaches who will spend time not just playing the sports, but also holding lessons outside of practice, after school,
Hmm.
renting out community center space. And that's something, like, that sense of kinship literally is something that was reported back to be one of the biggest benefits.
That's very interesting. I totally forgot about that because I haven't been part of a sports team or in high school or since high school. So 10, 13 years or so, I forgot that some of these coaches were literal fathers for some of my teammates who maybe didn't have someone at home or didn't really know kind of some basic rules on how to conduct yourself growing up during those tumultuous years. You mentioned also another thing is that women tend to seek out therapy and tend to remain with a therapist longer than men. Do you think that sometimes males are underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed when they do seek help?
I do think that is an issue for everyone, truthfully. I think
Hmm.
one issue I've seen that I can speak to is in a lot of school districts where, say, you have staff who are either not mental health professionals themselves or are very overworked. a lot of kids might present with what is seen as a behavioral issue or inability to regulate themselves emotionally. And then that leads them into certain classes where they're made to feel smaller, they're not able to express themselves, and then it becomes a vicious cycle. And it could have just been someone who, for whatever reason, has a lot going on at home, has stuff that anyone would find stressful, but then, you know, if you get a certain label on you in certain schools, sometimes that can stay with you, unfortunately, and have some real consequences. And it's all kind of a symptom of this like very unequal distribution of resources, and like in both like inside a school or outside, and just generally in our world.
How do you think we can challenge this stigma that's basically all over the planet about mental health, specifically with men? Because, like I said, if you encounter a female that is going to therapy, it doesn't really raise an eyebrow, but sometimes with males, it does, even involuntarily. Um, it kind of stops you in your tracks. How do we make this a normal thing for men and males to, especially at a younger age, to seek therapy and get that help without being afraid of being teased or any repercussions?
I think it's a tough question, and I think there's two ways to approach it. There's one approach where I think there's been a lot more mass media campaigns where even just growing up, kids will now see more commercials where it'll be famous people speaking about, okay, like I was someone who saw a therapist, I needed help, and even though I might seem like this famous, rich, successful person, I still have issues and I still do this. And while meanwhile, when I was growing up, sometimes like therapy would be something in like just conversation amongst young selves, like, oh, like therapy, that must mean something is off, and
Hmm.
that's something that can stick with kids. So that's the flip side to it from a very young age, whether that's, I don't know how young necessarily, but just from a young age, allowing people to know that they can feel free to express themselves if they have anything that's upsetting them. Just basically making sure everyone knows that they are loved no matter what, and that they can have, even if everywhere doesn't afford them, that they can have at least one judgment free zone to express themselves and what they're truly feeling.
Awesome. So now that we know the importance of mental health, especially for males here, you said you took things into your own hands, and you basically said, how can I provide more resources to these adolescents? Yes, we have a baseball field, we have a soccer field, we have um, an auditorium that's gigantic, an indoor gym, but where are the facilities for mental health? Can we redistribute it that way, right? Talk to us a little bit about what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, so I think what I'm basically trying to do is there's this phenomenon across the country that I've been like saddened by, for lack of a better word, since I first heard about it 6 years ago. And it's this phenomenon where if you look across the United States, a lot of the most underserved neighborhoods are within maybe a mile or two of some of the wealthiest colleges, universities, or companies in the country. So it's this stark divide. And what I'm trying to do is basically say, okay, how can we take some of what is plentiful in a lot of these places? In the case of universities, right? They pride themselves on being bastions of knowledge and spreading information. How can we take that, and while still being in line with their mission, have some of that, having some of those resources and support shared with their neighbors, not just for charity, but in the spirit of just genuinely being a good neighbor. and and a big part of that, and this is based on the need, is there's a million directions one could go with that, but what I'm trying to do as a starting point is focus on mental health for most, first and foremost, given how important it is and how central it is to one's sense of self and how they go about their days, not to mention the ripple effects that mental health can have on others, especially if it's not in the best place. And basically, what I'm trying to set up is partnerships where, by just bringing people who might not otherwise talk to each other onto the same table, they realize, wait a second, we want to do this. The school district might say, we want to help mental health. And then they'll find out the university also has the same goal. And then it becomes much easier just by having them at the same table. to figure out a way where they can partner and collaborate at sometimes even mutual benefit for everyone in a way that gets, whether it be support professionals, community center space, basically anything that promotes wellness. For me, chess was always an outlet for wellness. Just all these little things, or big, that help students have the access, particularly adolescents, access to different avenues where they can express their stress and know that they're supported in their mental health journeys.
So you were able to notice that most underserved communities are actually right next to a prominent university, that
Maybe not most, but
a lot
quite
of
a
them.
few, yes.
And these prominent universities have all these resources, such as mental health resources, right?
Right.
And so you're trying to bridge that gap where if the university has all this money and resources dedicated to mental health, if they're maybe not using all of them, be a good neighbor and help out the community down the street that is having all these stress and mental health issues, right?
Exactly. And the value I always try to pitch to others is you never know who, by just being a good neighbor, whether it's 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how might that person come back to someone else and think of something of their own that will then perpetuate them just being able to live their fullest life? I'm a big believer in that and inspiring everyone to be able to live their best lives. And I don't think it's possible to live your best life without a strong mental health foundation. And of course, it's
Hmm.
easier said than done, which is why it requires a collaborative effort.
That's right. Well, if we're talking about stigma, underserved communities have some of the biggest stigma when it comes to mental health, and
Yeah.
we can't ignore that. So, how do you tackle that issue? How do you walk into these neighborhoods and say, you're feeling stressed, you're feeling anxious. This is what these feelings mean. Come with me. I have the solution down the street at the university. How do you pitch that to them?
Yeah, so right, so basically, more so than framing it as the university, what we really try to do is center it around schools and local community organizations. While the university might have certain staff they give, a lot of the connections are really built at the local level, whether that's with on the ground teachers, principals, or community organization leaders.
Hmm.
Sports coaches are another avenue we have used in some of our early conversations. And we were very pleasantly surprised by the amount of positivity and responses we got from people who were very willing to do this. One individual who comes to mind, actually, he used to be a former NFL player, and what he'll do now is he'll come to this school and he tells himself, like, if he literally will give the kids his phone number and say, you give me a call if there's anything
Hmm.
at all you want to talk about, no matter the hour, I'm going to answer. And when kids hear that, there's no better example of, okay, if this guy, a former NFL player, is willing to do this, this must be something important. And that's how you begin opening the doors to, and breaking down stigma. It's a long process, of course, but it's leveraging individuals like that and really working with the trusted figures, a lot of who may be at the school or their school's partners, who are key, in my opinion, to breaking down stigma.
Got it. So you kind of reach the higher levels of the community, the coaches, the teachers, the principals, and hopefully it trickles down that way. Once you get the kids connected to the university, does the university provide, what is it that they provide? A therapist? What type of resources do they provide? Like chess club?
It very much depends on whatever the kids' needs are.
Hmm.
Basically, the way things are set up and the way different things are paid for, what my organization strives to show is there's like a whole menu effectively of things schools are currently losing lots and lots of money now, that with just a little bit of a nudge
Hmm.
they can make accessible to so many more people. So what I try to do is, when I meet with school districts, I'll show them, of these like 8 different things, whether that's psychology, after school clubs, social work, hearing evaluations, uh what else, even a psychiatrist in some instances, which of these things would you like, and we'll figure out a way to make it happen, because it doesn't have to be just a university. It could be anyone, truly, whether it's a free clinic in the area or even just a kind individual who wants to help in whatever way they can. So things are pretty malleable in terms of there's always a role for everyone. It's just all about, and as corny as it might sound, someone who's willing to lend a kind, judgment-free ear.
Well, you know what you're really doing? You're rebuilding the fabric of American society. Because what you're doing is you're walking into a town and you're connecting. I thought it was just universities and schools, but you're really just connecting anyone who needs something to someone that has that something, right? So that's
That's a
kind
great
of,
way to put it. Yeah.
yeah. So um that's something that, as an immigrant myself, we moved here from Italy. We actually lived in Pittsburgh for 3 years. We could talk about that later.
No way. That's so cool.
Yeah. The first thing we noticed is how you don't know your neighbors in America.
Right.
You don't say hi on the street. You don't know what's going. You just live and do your own thing. And in Italy, it's like it's overwhelming. I mean, people say hi to me, and I'm asking my mom, "Do we know that person?" It's like, no, it's Italy. You just say hi, and if someone needs something, you give it to them, and that's it. So, very admirable what you're doing. Hopefully, you'll be able to reprogram America. But other than that, is there any last comments or remarks that you would like to make about mental health, stress, how males deal with it and better process it, or your project? Any last comments?
No, I just want to thank you so much for having me on. And I think another big part of improving mental health is having forums like this one that you're hosting, and having dedication to the cause to host these types of things. That's a huge thing, and really admire what you're doing here.
No worries. No worries. Well, guys, thank you for listening to the first episode of Sunday Scaries. This has been Krishna Patel, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.